So in terms of manufacturing, the generic issue is that because all the industrial automation is having more and more digital assets, so more and more computers, more and more IP-based traffic, then everything is more open for cyber attacks. So that's the general what's happening in the world of industrial automation, whether it's critical infrastructure or whether it's manufacturing. And on top of that, the fact is that when people looked at this 5 years ago, it was something that was kind of rocket science, very difficult to do. It was mainly regarded for nation-state kind of activities. But unfortunately, in the last few years, it became kind of a commodity. So nowadays, people understand that it's quite easy actually to create such attacks. And it's also available for more and more of the bad guys to do it in quite an easy way. So that's why now it's not only really applicable for the critical infrastructure, because once it was rocket science, it was only for the nation kind of activities. Now once it became a commodity, then it's also something that is a very attractive kind of a crime for manufacturing. So you can implement a ransomware, you can shut down the manufacturing and so on. So it just became a kind of the regular kind of a crime activity. I think for manufacturing, actually, the situation is even worse because of several aspects. First of all, manufacturing usually have multiple sites, so they have many factories around the world, and usually they have connectivities between them in a quite an open way. So there is a benefit to share a lot of the manufacturing data between the sites. So they do have connectivity. And because the sites for a manufacturing company is different in terms of maturity, so if they have a site in Germany, whether they have a site in Malaysia, probably the level of awareness for cybersecurity, the level of the infrastructure and so on is not the same. So it can be that maybe in Europe somewhere they think that they are actually well protected and have the right level of awareness, but in some of their remote facilities actually the situation might be worse. And because of the intersite connectivity, once you are into one of their facilities, then actually you are everywhere. So this is one factor that is actually quite problematic for the manufacturing sector. For the critical infrastructure, there will be also multiple sites, but all of them are in the same level of maturity. Usually they are all under national grid substations, so they will be all managed in the right way. So that's, I think, one factor which is very relevant and makes things much worse for the manufacturing enterprises. The second thing is that for manufacturing, the whole issue of using remote maintenance, so working with the vendors and giving them remote access to their sites, is something that is very common. In the critical infrastructure, it is common that you will not have access for such activities, and you just design your agreement with the vendor in this way. For manufacturing, usually you just open your network to this kind of, whether it's remote maintenance or whether it's even just some of the ongoing operations. So of course, this is also creating a very critical attack surface, because once you are connected to the internet, then you are in big troubles. So that's the second thing, which is very specific for manufacturing. And the third thing is that it's also similar to the critical infrastructure, but I think in manufacturing it was done in an easier way, is that you are adding all the time another production line, another improvement in the system, some supportive system for energy optimization or some other things. So you are adding all the time, step by step, additional subsystem into your network, which ends up in the level that, first of all, you are using multi-vendors and multi-subsystems, so each of them can be an attack point into the network and eventually get to the other subsystem. And also your visibility, your understanding of what you actually have in your network is very, very poor. So you think you know what you have in your network, but you install some small supporting system for energy optimization, but actually this system has some internet connection and you don't even know about it. So this level of visibility of understanding what you have in your system is usually lower than in other sectors.
And hackers or cyber criminals, whatever you want to call them, nation states, are they generally going through these third-party vendors, or do they tend to kind of attack manufacturers straight away? Do you know?
So it is two ways. One is through these third-party vendors, And the second thing is that just everything that is exposed to the internet, so not necessarily going through the third parties. Third parties actually sometimes it's a bit more sophisticated than just trying to find out what do you have in the internet, whether you have some remote facility in Malaysia that has some open access to some of the local system integrators to do something, and then you go from there through the rest of the network. So that would be the easiest path to get into an enterprise. And you have, unfortunately, you have all the dark web where you can get all this kind of data about. If you go after one of the big enterprises, I don't know, Unilever, then if you do enough search in the dark web, you will find places where you can initiate this kind of an attack.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can get like cyber attack as a service now as well, can't you? You can just, it's all packaged up ready for you. It's crazy. So that's really good.
One thing that is also important, actually, also going back to the way how to penetrate the network, is the fact that in the industrial world, in the manufacturing world, it is very common that you will also have connectivity between the enterprise layer, the enterprise network, where you have, kind of the regular office, and the production network. In the critical infrastructure, for example, it usually will be very, very separate. In the manufacturing world, you do need it because a lot of the manufacturing processes actually start in the enterprise world, getting demands, getting orders, doing all the planning and so on, and then getting to the production level. And you do want it to be very dynamic, very cost effective. So there is a lot of such connectivity. So going back also to the attack surface, a lot of it will start from the enterprise level. So getting some, emails and users of people in the enterprise level, getting into the enterprise network, and then finding the computer that is also connected to the production floor in order to initiate such an attack.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
So, is there also a problem with the kind of machinery itself in these factories not being updated quickly enough to keep up with being connected to these kind of IT networks?
Yes, so once you have this connectivity to different attack points, whether it's connection to the internet or whether it's connection to the enterprise and so on and so forth, then the problem is that you better be up to speed in terms of your updates. But in manufacturing world, people are very cautious about doing any updates because you don't want to stop the production. So many of these systems, because of all this digital transformation, not necessarily were designed in the best way in terms of all of their networking and software design and so on. So if you are doing frequent updates, if you do it, in your Microsoft, in your laptop, and it gets stuck, then you just, have a few hours of downtime, and then you find a way to go back, and it's fine. In manufacturing, you cannot do it. You will not have a few hours of downtime, can be millions. So it is very difficult to schedule such an update. So usually it's done once a year would be good if it's done in such a production floor, because they need to plan it, they need to test it, they need to coordinate it with a lot of people. So it's usually done not in the right frequency.
Yeah. How do they generally do kind of the updates and implement cybersecurity then, if they're really trying not to have any downtime?
So usually there will be two types of activities. One is the regular updates, which usually they play once a year, such a time slot for a downtime where they do everything. So it will be, one day or more where they do just everything in terms of updates, not just cybersecurity, but everything about updating their machines and so on. And then they should have, not necessarily they have, but they should have also a process in place where they say if there is a critical threat, like there was something that was already taking down some production systems, or there is something that is relevant for a very critical vendor of your network, then you should initiate some emergency update, which is, it's not very easy. It is a pain to initiate such a process, but I think even worse, probably most of them don't even have such a process.
Right. Okay. So why is that then? So apart from the downtime issue, is there a lack of awareness, or maybe awareness isn't the right word, but appreciation of the security risks now, perhaps? Or are people aware of it is just the downtime issue they're worried about?
I think that it's a mix. So I think there is awareness. I think by now there were enough incidents that people are aware of the risk, not necessarily aware of their specific risk. They are aware of the fact that there is such a risk in general. But then in most cases, they just haven't gone through the process of doing their own specific evaluation to understand what is actually their own risk posture, where are the relevant attack surfaces, what do they need to monitor in order to be up to speed in terms of whether there is something that they need to take care of, whether they have this kind of a procedure to have a quarterly or whatever type of a review to see what do they need to implement. So I think the initial awareness, the kind of the generic awareness is already there.
Yeah.
The specific awareness to make it specific for you to do this kind of an assessment and to see what's really relevant for me. I think this is one thing that is still very much missing. And then on the other side, the fact that doing any updates, the risk of the downtime is always there. Then this combination is really what's driving this game.
Yeah, okay. And are all the other factors that are happening at the moment impacting this as well? Because obviously with costs going up and all that kind of stuff, is it an issue that these manufacturers are focusing more on cutting costs than
unfortunately, it's something actually that is quite recent, but we do start to hear such a discussion. So I think that, it was kind of going, actually, if you look last year, it was very good in terms of the growing the awareness and initiating some activities in terms of cybersecurity awareness, assessments, planning, and so on. I think last year was very good. This year, especially in the last few months, once people understand that unfortunately the situation is not going to be fixed soon. So people are starting to be concerned. For example, we heard from some manufacturing enterprise saying, the cost of energy is, just crazy. So it is cutting down on their profits. So they do need on the other end to cut down on some of their budget and some of their plans. And unfortunately, OT cybersecurity is a new thing in their plan, so it is very easy to say, okay, we can maybe defer it in another half a year or a year and so on. So we do start to see, I think, mainly when people are starting to discuss 2023 budgets, we do start to hear this kind of discussions.
Yeah, okay.
Am I right in thinking that OT security refers to kind of not just attacks, but stopping downtime in general, so the overall kind of uptime health of a manufacturing company?
So this is usually a different area. So there is a lot about operational efficiency and improving the predictive maintenance. So there are all kinds of areas inside the more modern industrial automation. But this is OT cybersecurity is all about whether there will be a downtime because of a cybersecurity attack and not because you were not able to predict when you need to do a maintenance for one of their sites. Sometimes when people are looking a bit forward, there is an opportunity to use the same system in order to drive also this kind of an activity. So if you are monitoring your network and you know what you have in the system and you have a lot of asset information and a lot of information about their operational patterns, you can use it both for cybersecurity as well as for predictive maintenance. But usually it's not the first starting point. First of all, you need to decide why do you start this kind of a program, and then later on is kind of value add. You can also use it for other purposes.
Great, yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Is there kind of a way to quantify the effects of downtime on a manufacturing company?
So it is possible. I think that in most of the places it's not done nowadays, but it is possible. If you ask most of the people in the manufacturing world in a very high level view, they will know each of their facilities, which one is generating how many millions of dollars a day or a month or so on. And in most cases, the problem is that it's not just about what's the revenues per production line per day. You also need to have into account how long will it take you to recover from a downtime. So if you have a cyber attack, in order to quantify the impact, you need also to take, so it will be $1 million a day, but you need to know whether it will take you a week or a month to recover from such an attack. So it is also combining this. And one thing that is even making things even more complicated is that there is also the kind of the supply chain effect. So you have big companies, Unilever, GSK, whatever would be the name, where they have multiple facilities. One of them is actually generating some component that it will be used in another, generating some powder or some ingredient that is relevant for some of the other production lines. So you need to also to take into account this effect of the supply chain, both internally as well as even your external partners. So it is quite complicated to eventually evaluate the financial impact.
Yeah, and I guess any kind of or recurring downtime or attacks on your company will make people in your supply chain less willing to work with you.
That's another thing that is actually, I think that this is something that we do hear already. People are aware of it, even though it's not it's not quantified. But people that, for example, are supplying some plastics to BMW, they know that if they will have an issue with their production, even though it might be just dollars, but eventually they will be hit by the customer that will not be willing to stop their production because of their supplier that was having such multiple occurrences. So it is something that is, I would say, in a good way, it's already starting to be part of the discussion that some of the enterprises, they realize that they have kind of a tier one customer that they are not able to risk.
Yeah, that's more of a reputational thing, I guess, as well.
It's even to the sometimes it's on the level of the reputation, sometimes it's on the level of even the contract, saying that we don't really care why you had a downtime, but if you were not able to deliver to us the systems, then you are either up to a penalty or we can terminate the agreement and so on and so forth. So people are more and more aware of this issue.
Yeah, because internally they can get kind of bogged down on the whys and how to stop it, but it's these wider issues that are going to really affect business, like reputation, and then also getting cyber insurance in the future.
Exactly. Yeah, cyber insurance is a big issue now because there was a big increase in terms of the claims for cyber insurance, and then there was a big pushback from the insurance company saying, okay, we will give you insurance, but here is a long list of things that are exceptions. So now it's actually a big problem in terms of really, can you use cyber insurance? I think eventually it will get to some place in the middle where people will use it, but actually now it's in the point that it's not very useful because the insurance companies were just pushing back and saying, here is a long list of exceptions from our policy.
Yeah. Well, one of those conditions is now having effective cybersecurity in place, right?
Yeah, and it's not just effective cybersecurity, it's also whether this attack, maybe it was not just related. First of all, you need to have a cybersecurity plan in place, but also then if it was kind of related to a nation-state attack and not necessarily a commercial attack, then probably there would be an exception for that as well. And unfortunately, in cybersecurity, in most cases, you don't really know, and especially now with the geopolitical situation, everything more or less can be related to something between the East and the West and so on. So it is a problem, even if you have some cybersecurity things in place, but then you have some Russian, even kind of a private attack group bringing down some production line and even asking for ransom and so on. Still, people can claim that it is part of a wider geopolitical situation. So this is actually also widely used in terms of the exceptions on the insurance. So it is making the insurance a bit of a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was wondering if you could give us some particular examples of big manufacturing breaches. I know JBS Foods was a big one in recent years. Just any other ones off the top of your head?
I think that there was a very couple that were a few years ago, but were very famous. One was the Norsk Hydro case. That was, I think it's a metal company or aluminium company, something like that, that was taken down, the production was taken down. And that's something that also was quite famous because it was quite a significant downtime, but also it was claimed that actually they took care of it in the right way. So they were able to recover in a good way. So it is an example of a way that you actually, even if they did not have all the security things in place, they were able to recover quite fast. So it is an example of how you can do it in the right way, more or less. There were some recent cases, for example, again related maybe it's related to the war in Russia and so on. There were some cases, I think it was Toyota in Japan, that some of their suppliers were hit and they had to stop some of their manufacturing. It was shortly after Japan said that they are, supporting the US in their view about Russia and so on. So I think it was Toyota. Just I know, Yana, I don't know if you have some data on this.
There was something I can't recall the supplier, but
I think it was Toyota in Japan, if I remember correctly. So I think it's better to find it out. Just Google it, and I think there was something.
We can find it. I'll email it.
Case, and I think there was also another case. Again, it's manufacturing. It's somehow related to almost critical infrastructure. It's the Aramco case in Saudi Arabia a few years ago. Where there was a big issue with the actually safety system. So this was an example of a place where actually a cyber attack could end up in blowing up the facility.
Wow.
So this was a refinery. So in the case of Saudi Arabia, it's kind of a national critical infrastructure, but it is eventually manufacturing.
Yeah. Right. And then just as we've only got a few minutes left, just the best ways of confronting threats in the industry and protecting against breaches. I mean, obviously this will be the part of the article where we're putting in Radiflow's messaging about continuous monitoring and risk prioritization.
So I think that there are two things here. First of all, that you do need to do an assessment. That's the first thing that you need to do in order to understand your current risk posture, to understand where do you have the major gaps, and also to understand. So the good thing is once you do an assessment, you also understand to some level the business impact. So you do understand on the level of the crown jewels and the big places and so on, where are the critical places and what is the level of the risk for each of them. You also understand that where are the critical gaps, and you can start to build a plan how to close these gaps. And the most important thing about doing an assessment is that once you do an assessment, then you can, it is very important that actually you will do it as part of this process, is that you will build playbooks how to respond to an attack. Because like it was Norsk Hydro is a good example. They knew how to respond. They actually reacted quite fast and were recovering quite fast. This eventually the assumption for most of these manufacturing enterprises is that they will be hit. They just need to, first of all, to detect it early enough. So they need to put monitoring systems in place to detect it as early as possible. And they need to know, what does it mean for me? How do I recover from this? Whether it started in the IT, where does it go into the OT? Do I need to shut down all of my production floor, or can I still rely on something with some manual information, and so on and so forth? Where do I get my backup information, and so on? So it is very important that as part of the assessment, you will also build a plan for implementing some security controls and so on. But on the other end, you do need to assume that an attack will happen. So you do need to understand how do you monitor it and how you alert it early enough, and then have just the playbooks for remediation in a good way.
Yeah, I guess it's not a matter of if anymore. It's when.
Yeah, I think this is very clear, at least for the big manufacturing companies. Their working assumption is that it will happen just because there are so many attackers and attack tools out there that it will happen. They just need to understand early enough exactly where does it affect them, and to be able to recover in a fast way.
Is then trying to contain the threat once you've detected it, is containing it a big part of stopping it
so
from spreading?
Part of the remediation is to see how do you contain it. For example, even if it started on the IT, just to understand whether from the IT it really affects your OT, or whether you can still rely on your production processes. That's usually the biggest problem that they have, because many of the attacks actually start on the IT side. To understand whether it already got to your OT level, you do need to have some level of monitoring on the OT level to understand whether you can still rely on your pharmaceutical production, or you need to stop it and so on. These are many of the things that where they need to be able to contain, but also to be able to analyze and see whether it affects some of my production lines or not.
Great.
Cool.
Do you have any more questions, Sam?
No, I think that's covered a lot of it. I think that's a really useful.
Okay, one other comment, by the way, that I think is becoming very critical for manufacturing. We see it quite a lot. Is the fact that many of them, even if they do start to allocate the budget, they want to start such a program, they don't have the relevant resources in-house. So I think that critical infrastructure usually put more focus on recruiting this kind of people, or training this kind of people. On the manufacturing side, usually there will be zero or very little team that will be really working on this OT security. So even if they allocate the budget for it, they do need to find the people that can help them in this process. And in many places, it will be outsourced. It will not be internal.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. And is that getting harder for them to do, to find those people?
Yeah, it is. Also, you don't have a lot of these companies out there that are able to do it and are able to do it in a professional way without giving names of some big players. But we heard from some of the customers that even some of the big players, when they come and put an offer forward, it's not really a very professional offer. They don't really go into the details of how am I going to protect you. They just put some buzzwords.
Mm-hmm.
So it's even for some of the big companies that are trying to address this market, some of them are not yet, there is a market opportunity, not necessarily they have the right skills here, even for this kind of a system integrator or an MSSP. So there is a gap here in terms of being able to provide these services in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In manufacturing in particular, is it still kind of engineers and technicians who are the ones that are responsible for security?
So it is changing. So we do see that more and more the CISO, the security team, is in charge also of this. They do need to recruit, to bring on board also the manufacturing people. So we have seen places where the CISO team started an assessment, but then when they wanted to discuss it with the manufacturing team, they just got blocked. So it is also important to see how you bring them on board together with you and give them some value in terms of some asset information that they can use for their planning of their maintenance, or making sure that you're going to use it against them in the board and so on. So it is a delicate process that you need to manage internally.
Yeah, but one where there needs to be open communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great.
Brilliant.
Good.
Well, I think that was everything on our end. It's been really, really helpful. So thank you very much for sitting down with
Great.
us.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
I hope the conference goes well.
Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you both.
Bye.